Imagine waking up in the dead of night to the sound of your own front door opening. You aren't worried at first. You think you're safe. After all, the person you fear most is behind bars. Or so you thought. In December 2017, the quiet suburb of Canyon Country, California, became the stage for a crime so bizarre and so brutal that even seasoned investigators were left speechless. It wasn't just the murder of a beloved woman named Julie Dargas. It was what happened after the blood was spilled. At 5:30 in the morning, a silver SUV didn't just pull into a grocery store parking lot. It became a 3-ton battering ram. The driver didn't use a crowbar or a lockpick. He drove straight through the glass storefront, shattering the peace of the morning and the lives of everyone involved. But as the police chased this metallic beast across state lines, they had no idea that back at a quiet home on 181st Street, a much darker scene was waiting to be discovered. A scene where a common household appliance, something meant to clean a home, had been turned into an instrument of pure, unadulterated horror. This isn't just a story about a murder. This is a story about a savior who met the one person she couldn't save. This is the case of Julie Dargas and the man who turned her home into a nightmare. Welcome to True Gruesome Crime Stories. Julie Dargas was the kind of person who saw the best in everyone, a former model, a dedicated nurse, and a woman whose heart was simply too big for her own safety. For years, she played the role of the caregiver, the one who would reach into the fire to pull someone else out. But in the end, the fire she tried to extinguish would be the one that consumed her. Today, we are peeling back the layers of a marriage that was scarier than any Hollywood thriller. We're going to look at the red flags that were ignored, the secret betrayal by a family that should have known better, and the frantic, drug-fueled spree that followed a cold-blooded killing. We will analyze the forensic evidence that proved this wasn't an accident, the chilling testimony of a jailhouse snitch who knew things he shouldn't have, and the final, tragic moments of a woman who just wanted to be a mother. Stick with us until the end because the detail about the vacuum cleaner is more than just a weapon choice. It's a window into the mind of a monster. Let's get into it. To understand how Julie ended up on that kitchen floor, we have to go back to who she was. Born in 1980, Julie was the golden girl of her Southern California community. In 1996, at the age of 16, Julie took part in a debutante ball. To many, it was just a formal dance, but for Julie's family, it was a rite of passage. There is footage of her, tall, poised, radiant in a white gown, waltzing with her father. She was the picture of innocence and potential. She spent years in the modeling industry, but the shallow nature of the runway didn't fulfill her. She wanted to do something. She eventually found her calling in healthcare, specifically working in a psychiatric facility. Think about that for a moment. Her daily life was spent managing people in their darkest, most volatile moments. She was trained to stay calm in the face of chaos. This resilience was her greatest strength, but it was also the very thing that made her stay in dangerous situations far too long. Then there was David. Julie spent 12 years with David, a former Marine. Their relationship was a masterclass in Julie's need to nurture. David had survived a horrific car accident that killed his first wife and left him with chronic, life-altering pain. Julie didn't just love him, she managed him. She was his driver, his nurse, and his emotional anchor as he struggled with addiction to painkillers. But David would never give her the one thing she wanted, marriage. The trauma of his first wife's death had built a wall around his heart. After 12 years, Julie realized that you can't heal someone who doesn't want to be whole. She walked away in 2013, seeking a fresh start. But as the saying goes, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Enter George Dandakis Jr. Julie didn't just find a new boyfriend, she found a project. She had known George since she was 10 years old. He was her best friend Kristen's older brother. Back then, he was just a childhood crush. But by 2013, he was a man with a dark past and a seemingly bright future. George had a history of drug use and run-ins with the law, but when he re-entered Julie's life, he was the reformed man. He was working for his father's construction company, and most importantly to Julie, he was a single father raising 2 children on his own. To a woman like Julie, who had been told she might never naturally conceive due to endometriosis, George's children were a gift. She didn't just see a husband, she saw an instant family. George offered her the commitment David never could. He proposed within months, and they were married on her 34th birthday in 2014. But here's where the pattern interrupt happens in her life. Her father, a man who had watched her waltz in that white dress, didn't trust George. He saw through the reformed act. He saw the shadow of the addict. Her sister Jill saw it too. They warned her that she was falling into the same trap of self-sacrifice. Only Julie's mother supported the marriage, believing in the power of second chances. That belief would eventually be put to the ultimate tragic test. For 2 years, things were okay, but by late 2017, the mask began to slip. George wasn't just stressed. He was back on the needle. The irritability, the mood swings, the sudden disappearances, it was the classic playbook of an addict. And Julie, true to her nature, went back into caregiver mode. She paid for the rehabs, she monitored his every move, and she took over the full responsibility of raising his children while he spiraled. By November 2017, even Julie had reached her limit. She kicked him out. She began preparing for a divorce. It seemed like she was finally going to save herself. Then came the turning point. George was arrested after a high-speed police chase involving drugs. While he sat in county jail, he begged Julie to bail him out. She said no. She told her sister that as long as he was in jail, he was sober, and more importantly, she and the kids were safe. It was the smartest decision she ever made, but it was a decision that was about to be undermined by the people she trusted most, her in-laws. George's parents, George Sr. and his wife, couldn't stand seeing their son in a cell. Despite Julie's firm no, and despite knowing how dangerous he was when using, they went behind her back. On November 30th, 2017, they posted his bail. They didn't call Julie, they didn't warn her. George walked out of jail and straight into a world of resentment. He believed Julie had abandoned him. He was out for blood. For 48 hours, Julie lived in a false sense of security. She thought her husband was behind bars. She went about her Saturday routine, caring for George's children, unaware that the wolf was already at the door. At 3 a.m. on December 2nd, George left his parents' house. He told his mother he was stepping out, but he took his car and drove straight to 181st Street. The children weren't home. They were staying with friends, so Julie was alone. George used his own keys to enter. This wasn't a break-in. It was an ambush. The struggle started in the living room. Furniture was overturned, decorative items were smashed. Julie, trained in psychiatric care, likely tried to de-escalate, but George was beyond reason. She retreated toward the kitchen, leaving a trail of blood on the carpet. In the kitchen, the violence reached a fever pitch. George didn't just use a knife. He grabbed a heavy household vacuum cleaner. Think about the sheer rage required to use a vacuum as a club. He struck her with such force that the plastic casing warped and cracked. He wanted to break her, and when the blunt force wasn't enough, he finished it with a kitchen knife, inflicting a catastrophic wound to her neck. Julie died on her kitchen floor, face down in a pool of blood. She had defensive wounds on her hands. She fought until her very last bath. What George did next proves he wasn't just confused. He was cold. He didn't call 911. He didn't stay to mourn. He took the keys to Julie's silver Honda SUV, transferred his gear, and left his own car behind. At 5:30 a.m., the smash-and-grab robberies began. He used Julie's SUV as a weapon. He drove through the glass of a grocery store, grabbed cash, and left. 15 minutes later, he did it again at a 99-cent store. Then a third shop. He was methodical. He was gathering escape money. By the time the sun came up, George had ditched the SUV and was headed for the state line. George didn't stop in California. He drove east all the way to Louisiana. His luck ran out in New Orleans. Alerted by his erratic driving, police attempted a stop, which turned into a high-speed pursuit through the narrow, crowded streets of the Big Easy. It ended in a violent crash that was broadcast live on the local news. The reformed family man was now a national headline. When he was extradited back to LA, he tried to claim it was an accident. He said they were arguing over a bread knife and they both fell, but the vacuum cleaner told a different story. The nail in George's coffin didn't come from a detective, it came from a cellmate. While awaiting trial, George started talking to another inmate. This inmate happened to be an acquaintance of the Dandakis family, which made George feel safe. George bragged about the murder. He described the vacuum cleaner in detail, a detail the police had intentionally kept from the public. He described the specific way he cut her neck. When that cellmate took the stand, the accident defense evaporated. In April 2019, George Dandakis Jr. was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 70 years for the robberies. The story of Julie Dargas is a haunting reminder of 3 things. Trust your instincts over your intentions. Julie had the best intentions, but her gut and her family knew George was dangerous. Never let your desire to save someone blind you to the reality of who they are. The danger of enabling. George's parents thought they were helping their son by bailing him out. In reality, they were handing a loaded gun to a person in a crisis. The cycle of self-sacrifice. Being a caregiver is a noble profession, but in a relationship, it requires a partner who is willing to do the work. You cannot carry the weight of 2 people forever. Today, George Dandakis Jr. sits in a California state prison, where he will remain until he dies. Julie's father still carries the regret of not being firmer back in 2014, but he also knows that Julie was a woman of her own mind. Julie Dargas was more than a victim. She was a sister, a daughter, and a woman who desperately wanted to be a mother. Her life was defined by her capacity to care, and while that care was ultimately used against her, it remains the most beautiful thing about her memory. If this story touched you, or if you believe Julie's story needs to be heard to prevent this from happening to someone else, please hit the like button.
Comment below, do you think George's parents should have been held legally responsible for bailing him out against Julie's wishes? We want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to True Gruesome Crime Stories for more deep dives into the cases that the world tried to forget. Until next time, stay safe and look out for one another. The vacuum cleaner and the kitchen knife sit in an evidence locker, cold reminders of a night when a home became a crime scene. But Julie's story lives on as a warning and a tribute to those who give too much to those who deserve so little.